This is the Rachel Show, where we discuss all things lawfare, election fraud, and other current hot topics like media bias. And today I'm delighted to be interviewing Gem Balboa of the RINO Removal Project. I've been a part of it since it began, and I have just been excited to see the progress they are making. So finally, somebody has come along who's actually trying to root out this problem in the Republican Party. So, Jem, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in the Rhino Removal Project and a description of what you guys do.
Sure. Appreciate you inviting me on, Rachel. And I I am a very, very passionate patriot. And I was very disheartened by what was going on in the country over the last 4 or 5 years before Trump was elected. And I have three children, so as a father, I have a real care for what the future of the country is. And I hadn't been super active in politics until COVID hit and the election was stolen, and we had basically a turn up head in the presidency. And I realized that the MAGA army was only going to be as good for President Trump as the Congress and the states would allow him to. And I was really taken aback by how many Republicans were, in my opinion, fake and were infiltrators. So the whole uniparty thing, I viewed it as like, hey, how do we change this, right? Because it seemed to me the brainwashing that was going on in the media really did transcend. And I believe many, many Republicans love Donald Trump and they love the idea of America first and MAGA, but they seem to be blindsided by their own elected representatives in Congress. So the Rhino Removal Project was born about a year ago. So literally when Trump took office in the beginning of 2025, where Leo the Lion, myself, and a few others came around to the idea that the RNC and many of the state level Republicans, sort of red states, were completely infiltrated by fakes, and that these would be the single biggest roadblock to Trump putting in his America First MAGA policies. And we're seeing that play out, Rachel. I mean, it's pretty obvious that the Republican Party across the board is undermining the Trump agenda in Congress. And we need to be extremely diligent in the primaries to make these big changes happen. So the Rhino Removal Project is essentially a grassroots group that is connecting people in the Republican states to raise awareness for the primaries and educate voters as to why an establishment politician in many of these Republican states is fake, phony, has not voted the way he said he would, has been an anti-Trumper. The whole list is long, but there are many, many who are really more Democrat than they are Republican, and they deserve to be replaced by someone who will help us advance the American vision of the Constitution. And that's really what the Rhino Removal Project is about. I
And
hope that was a good enough
yeah,
explanation.
that's exactly what I was looking for. You said that much better than I could have because you're much more involved in this than I am. I've written a couple articles about the Rhino Removal Project, and I just wanted to add on to that. I have a friend in Congress who has a very good rating from the American Conservative Union, and this friend told me that they get so angry when they see Rhino members of Congress talking the talking points of MAGA, but they vote with the Democrats. And this person told me they are just so disgusted with it. They don't even want to be in Congress anymore because it's all just this big facade. And it sounds like the RINO Removal Project is mostly focusing on these big congressional races, Senate races. Here in Arizona, you guys are now looking at our CD1 race where we have this horrible, horrible candidate. He was a football player, this Jay Feely, who came out and denounced the J6 pardons. He didn't just desert the J6ers when they were in prison, but after Trump pardoned them, he came out and bashed the pardons. And so, on the other hand, we have wonderful state legislature Joseph Chaplik in that district, who has a 98% lifetime rating from the American Conservative Union. And since he's from that district, he already has name recognition. He's a perfectly good candidate. But Trump has already endorsed Jay Feely instead of the obvious perfect choice. And he's also endorsed Gina Swoboda, our outgoing AZ GOP chair, who some people have been disappointed with. I've heard that she's actually going to be jumping out of that race and transferring to the Arizona Secretary of State's race, believe it or not. But anyway, can you tell us more about like what races you're targeting? And before you do, I do want to mention, there's a lot of establishment Republicans who say, oh, we shouldn't be getting involved in the primaries. That's, Reagan's 11th commandment. You can't speak ill of any other Republican. Well, I disagree. I think if it's an obvious RINO and they're voting like a Democrat, then they really aren't a Republican and you should get involved. And thankfully, here in Arizona, we have a wonderful person who's not even a Republican who goes around in primaries and tries to get the bad candidates out so we can all focus on one good conservative candidate. So it is happening, but that is happening outside of the party. So can you explain to us like some of these races that you guys are focusing on, the Senate races, the congressional races, that aspect?
Absolutely. We're obviously we're new, but we're trying to focus on races that will make a difference where we've got people in state who are connected to grassroots movements. So we try to amplify their voice on social media and we try to get them connected to grassroots groups that share the same values. So we're big in Texas. So Texas, led by Steve Loves Ammo, who, he's a huge account on much of social media. And so the Senate race there, where we were instrumental in that, I think, because we've been supporting Ken Paxton all along. We think John Cornyn is probably one of the biggest enemies of we the people. He's a clear Democrat. You even had Jasmine Crockett come out on an interview and literally spill the beans and say, John Cornyn is a friend. He pretends to be MAGA just so he can get elected. I
Wow.
mean, she literally explained it, on like one of the NBC programs. She literally was like, he's a great friend. So he's a Democrat. And Ken Paxton has been a great ally of America First. And one of the things that we've been doing is we've been holding spaces on X teaching people about primaries, like when is the primary and what's the difference between like an open primary and a closed primary. So one of the nonprofit sponsors of Rhino Removal Project actually had us hold two spaces on the constitutional basis for closing the primaries. So just like us Americans don't like non-citizens voting in our elections, as Republicans, we should not want Democrats voting in our primary to nominate our candidates. And that happens in the super red states. And that is one of the reasons that RINOs get elected. So one of the key things that Ken Paxton has done in Texas is expose more RINOs because he has made a motion to close the primaries with the chairman of the GOP in Texas. And guess who came out against it, Rachel?
Cornyn.
No, the governor, Greg Abbott, and the Secretary of State, two Republicans came out and said, no, we don't want to support your motion to close the primary so only Republicans can nominate candidates. And that shows you how twisted and deep the deep state is, and infiltrated the Republican Party is. So we're trying to do this in all the red states. So the Paxton race is key for us. You know, Dan Crenshaw. We think he's a major rhino in Texas. We're even looking to hold a virtual debate with Steve Toth, who is his main challenger, and him. We're hoping he will show up. Um, and a few other elections that we think are key would be in North Carolina. The primary there is also in March, and everyone who knows that Tom Tillis is a rhino from North Carolina, well, he steps down, and who takes over but Michael Whatley? And Michael Whatley is like Tom Tillis on steroids. He is a deep state, um, horrible candidate, and unfortunately, he was endorsed by Trump. And this is one of the races which is actually very close. The MAGA America First Army in North Carolina um, is mobilized, and Dom Brown, who is a veteran America First candidate, is actually outpolling Michael Whatley in North Carolina. So that would be another key race for us. And then in South Carolina, Lindsey Graham. Again, that's another state we're trying to get primaries closed because the Democrats are likely to be the ones that would elect Lindsey Graham. And that primary is not until May. But we are big fans of Mark Lynch. Unfortunately, there are two good America First candidates. And one of the roles of rhino removal will be to try to consolidate that into a single candidate, because what we don't want is we don't want the America First MAGA vote getting split and then the rhino wins because, in addition to the Republicans, they get the Democrat vote. So what we're really trying to do is we try to educate people on the primary. When is it? Why is it important that we just have one candidate? And why is the current existing establishment candidate somebody who is not who you think they are? And that's really essentially what we're doing. And in each state, we pull together grassroots groups like Moms for Liberty, the Freedom Caucus, the Conservative Party, um, the Conservative Caucus, um, John Birch Society. I mean, there's loads of grassroots groups where their members are passionate about all the things that make America what we believe is important about being American, and it flows through to all the Constitution and all of the precious American liberties that we have, and in a crock, smaller, less government in general. Um, what I like to say is I voted for deep state destruction. It pains me to see how overreaching the government has become with all the lawfare that they do against patriots, and that, quite frankly, the government has just become out of control with fraud, waste, and abuse. So part of solving that, we hope Elon Musk realizes, is replacing fake rhino infiltrators with people who are passionate about America First values.
And that's one thing I know you guys are trying to do is get on Elon Musk's radar. And are we having any success there? Like, I try to tag him in some of my posts, but I don't feel like he quite knows about the Rhino Removal Project yet.
Well, I know that he doesn't quite know about it yet. Um, we're hoping that he realizes what's been going on in Congress is illuminating him to the idea that the Republican Party is not pushing through the America First agenda, right? I mean, what he did with Doge, for the Republicans to literally blank him and go forward with spending on many of these ridiculous bills. um, I think he realizes that the Republican Party has been infiltrated, and I don't necessarily know that he knows there's a mechanism because most people assume that the RNC and Republicans are the same. And it's only really, it takes a little bit of time for someone to become like awakened to the idea that no, the Republican Party has been infiltrated and the people who are in charge are really the main source and the root of the problem. So we're really fighting, um, a multi battle line war here within the Republican Party to retake it for the MAGA America First movement. And we really do need help, and he would be a great equalizer.
And, I want to point out that here in Arizona, we are especially interested in the RINO Removal Project because of all the states in the country, we were the ones stuck with John McCain for years and years, and his McCainiacs linger. I just had somebody telling me today, oh no, the GOP is, being taken over by the McCainiac faction that's still around. So, it's still a huge threat here in Arizona. And I want to touch on something you said about the primaries being open or closed. Here in Arizona, we have semi-closed primaries. So what that means is if you're a Democrat, you can't vote in the Republican primary, but if you're an independent, you can pick which ballot you want to vote in for the primary. So that's still a problem because these Democrats are so organized that they go and they switch their voter registration to independent at the last minute, and then they vote and meddle in our primaries. And that's also a problem, and that needs to be fixed. And I want to add too, I wrote an article not too long ago called Why Rhinos Are Rhinos, and I'll include it in a link at the bottom of this video. But I do think that part of what we need to do is expose why they're rhinos because, they all talk like they're so conservative, like McCain used to do. This is just straight talk and I'm just honest. But that their actions don't follow their words. And why don't they follow their words? I believe the primary reason is money. I think a lot of it is blackmail. I mean, McCain threatened me 3 times, and one of them caused a lot of political damage. It really hurt me. So I think a lot of it is the threats, but a lot of it is just the money. They want to protect their little fiefdom and these big businesses who are giving them money. And a lot of the big businesses, I can tell you right now, these are millionaires and billionaires who don't pay close attention to politics. They don't understand like the whole election fraud issue. So what I hear here in Arizona all the time is the big millionaires and the big businesses don't want their money going to relitigate the 2020 election. And so they tell these conservatives, you can't talk about election fraud. You can't look into election fraud. It's a poison pill. It will hurt us. And they say the same thing about the pro-life issue. They say the pro-life issue is a done deal. We're not going to get anywhere. Don't talk about it. Da, 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 da. So that's what's sort of going on behind the scenes. And have you found that in your research, Gem? Why are you finding that these candidates are and elected officials are rhinos?
Well, I mean, those are some of the great examples that you just gave. I think any candidate that is or any elected official that wants to whitewash or gaslight around, election fraud issues is a massive red flag. Just like all of the ones that are now, you know, like going silent, right? When it comes up about like the Save Act Plus and safeguarding elections, the sheer volume of Republicans that are elected officials that don't take a position and don't say anything, in my opinion, that's a position, right? Because they're too scared. And so those are all massive tells of somebody who is fake, right? Anybody who's a true patriot should be jumping up and down and doing cartwheels saying, we need to safeguard the sanctity of our elections. And any fraud can't be tolerated and must be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. So that is definitely a harbinger of a rhino. Others are, there's a huge list, but calling things bipartisan and voting with Democrats. Um, the sheer volume of them that are in Congress that do that, I think would shock most of their own constituents, right? I had somebody who was asking me about New York and the fact that Elise Stefanik, in these most two recent votes that were in Congress, literally voted for this, this spending bill, the NED one, which is full of all the stuff that Elon Musk hates, all the fraud, waste, and abuse is in there. And they asked me about it, and I said, Elise Stefanik is not the only squad member in New York. Her voting record is just as bad as AOC's. It's almost like they're twins. And, one is out there talking for Democrats, the other pretends to be a Republican and does a very good job on it. And it's only when you see how these people vote that you realize that they're enablers. They're enabling the Democrat, Marxist, communist, agenda. So somebody who is pretending and enabling the enemy is pretty much worse than the enemy because they're lying, right? So Democrats like AOC and Schumer and any of the Democrats that you see out there, at least you know who they are, right? They're not hiding it. The problem with Republicans is that the vast majority of them literally are fake. And when you only get to see it when you see that they either don't take action, they vote bipartisan with Democrats all the time, they undermine all the things that we care about, and they do it in subtle ways. They rely upon the fact that people may not have, a good memory, and they just wait it out and they just think, oh, I won't do anything. And me not doing anything, no one's going to remember.
And then people don't
We're
think to
remembering.
look up, and people don't think to look up their voting records. Like to me, that is just like a no-brainer. I mean, I look up people's voting records at the
Well,
American Conservative Union every day. And I want to point out too, the only thing I will say in defense of Stefanik is she does represent a left-leaning district. So I would put her on a different level than some of the other worst rhinos. But those other worst rhinos, they represent conservative districts and they're still rhinos. What drives me crazy is, here in Arizona, we have one of the 10 most competitive swing districts in the race in CD10. I'm sorry, CD1. And that's the seat that David Schweikert has held for since 2010. Well, even though he's in a competitive swing district, his lifetime rating from the American Conservative Union is a 95, which is very good. And I should point out Representative Andy Biggs, who's from a safe red district in Arizona, CD5, his lifetime rating is only 1 point higher than Schweikert's at 96. So I do believe that you can be in a somewhat competitive district and still not vote like a rhino.
yeah, I mean that's a good point, and so it's a combination of voting record, and also because sometimes the voting records are skewed because they don't vote on a lot of things, right? Like a lot of people in Congress don't actually show up to a lot of votes,
That's
and
like
so they
that's like
abstain.
cheating. That's like cheating because you are taking a position when you don't show up to vote.
That's right. So we look at that too because a lot of the records that you're quoting are tainted by non-votes. And so that's one of the other ways that they manipulate is they basically just dodge responsibility. And you even see that now, the dodging of responsibility with like, look at all the fraud that we found in Minnesota. And like, where are the Republicans? Right? They'll just dodge responsibility because Congress can get involved in this too, right? This is all money that they appropriated. So they'll sit there and they'll point the finger at like the DOJ and the FBI. But the reality is why are you still appropriating money when there's obvious fraud, waste, and abuse? And oh, you're not going to say anything about it? So, like, in my opinion, if you're not against it, and you're not coming out and being verbal about it, but you're just silent, then you're complicit. And being complicit is part of the problem. So it's people who are complicit, people who vote with Democrats and literally people who will slander America First MAGA patriots for a variety of things, like the election fraud denial, January 6th denial, still calling them, terrorists or insurrectionists or whatever you want to call it.
Even though
There's
not a single one was ever
hundreds of
convicted of
rhinos.
insurrection. Yeah.
No, no. Like my favorite is Dan Crenshaw, right? We were talking about him before. Um, I mean, how horrible is someone like Dan Crenshaw when he's supposed to be a Republican, he's supposed to stand for the Constitution. And from his district, there were 6 patriots that were locked up in solitary confinement where their due process was violated. He was asked about this on camera, and his response was, they're terrorists. They deserve everything that they get.
Sick. Sick.
Now, these are Americans from his district that are literally being tortured in like a Washington, D.C. jail where they're being put in solitary confinement. And the shocking thing to me, Rachel, is the United Nations and the Geneva Convention say that if a person is kept in solitary confinement for more than 14 days, it's considered torture. 4 of the 6 people from his district were not only kept in solitary confinement for more than 14 days, many of them were kept in solitary confinement for almost a year.
I know.
And
I've
he's
written
calling
about it.
them terrorists. They hadn't even faced a jury or a judge yet.
And all they were
How
doing
bad
was
of a human rights
protesting. All they were doing was protesting the theft of our elections in the most important election. I mean, let's get real. These
so,
they they
so
thought
think
that they
about
were
that.
they were acting like the founding fathers. They thought they were doing the right thing, standing up to the most
Right.
horrific election crimes, tearing away the foundation of our country.
Yeah, and many of them, the worst that they got, convicted for was trespassing. So imagine that they're basically being put before a punishment that is literally way outsized worse than anything that they could get sentenced to prior to a trial. I mean, that's the part that blows my mind. And Dan Crenshaw, who is supposed to represent them, is out there calling them terrorists. So if that's not the definition of a rhino, I don't know what is.
He needs to go.
So,
And you brought up something
oh,
else.
yeah,
You brought up something else that I want to touch on. So, I always say there are two things I disagree with Trump on. Otherwise, I agree with him on like 98% of everything. One is I don't like how he goes about his pardons. And two, I don't agree with a lot of his endorsements. And what we know is going on there is he's got this political class around him, the establishment, lobbyists, people with ties to all these big, these consultants making all this money. And they're the ones giving him the bad advice and telling him to endorse the rhinos. So, I'm sure that, some of the cases, these rhinos buy Trump's endorsements. I don't agree with that. We had fake masters here in Arizona bought Trump's Senate endorsement for $6 million. So, and of course, he went on to lose the race because he was such a horrible candidate. Mark Brnovich should have been the candidate in that race. He would have won. But what can we do about this? Is the RINO Removal Project, trying to make inroads here? Because we've got to stop these bad endorsements from Trump. It's just mucking everything up.
I totally agree with you, Rachel. We've been trying to figure out where these endorsements are coming from with Trump. And like you eloquently put it, it would appear there are people around him that are still compromised, right? The deep state is deep, and the deep state knows how to manipulate. And I think Trump is easily manipulated when it comes to some of these elections because he can't know everything about everybody. And he has to be able to take the word of some of his advisors. And in some cases, I believe he is being like intentionally manipulated by deep state people that are in his administration. And it is unfortunate. How we get around it, we just got to continue to be consistent, pound the pavement, get loud on social media, and hope some of the big guys like Elon Musk notice, because we're still new, and we hope that we can have an impact in some of these primaries, and we're helping Trump, and he doesn't even realize it. But I think he will greatly appreciate it if we're successful, and not only that we win the midterms, but we win the midterms with MAGA America First candidates, because that will make the ability to actually get all of the things that he wants done.
And, I'd like to point out that a key Trump person who was pardoned by Trump told me that the deep state in one of the federal agencies tried to stop his pardon from going ahead. And it just caused a whole bunch of problems for this person because, yeah, these people are still there. You can't get rid of them because a lot of them are merit protected. And there's always some follow the money thing going on. I mean, it just drives me crazy. But I do want to ask you, we're down to the last 8 or 9 minutes. What have you learned since being a part of the RINO Removal Project? Because you're now kind of an expert on it.
Yeah. Oh my God. I've learned so much. I could probably do a whole podcast just on what I've learned.
Oh,
But
I'll have to have you
I think
back later. Yeah.
what what stands out for me, Rachel, is I've learned that really the majority of people don't understand how badly infiltrated the Republican Party is. And when I tell them stories of what's actually happened, the criminality of um, state level in particular, Republican GOP, um, like executive committees, right? I think people are shocked, okay, where you've actually had elected officials in states like Utah, Florida, Georgia, who are America First patriots literally be removed in criminal ways by rhinos at the state level. And I never realized how bad and criminal the infestation is of the Republican Party from the county level up to the federal level, right? So when people learn about what happened, like for example, in the Utah primaries, where the governor and the senator of Utah are both illegitimate, right? Because the lieutenant governor single handedly replaced the two individuals, Don Lyman and what was the other guy's name? I forget the mayor of Salt Lake, but the two winners of the convention who won by more than 2/3 the vote, they were replaced by Cox and Curtis, by
Wow.
the lieutenant governor.
Wow.
Total criminal. And in Florida, you have, I think it's something like six elected MAGA America First people who, the day after they were elected, were literally kicked out of the Republican Party by senior officials. And they then appointed new people to those positions. So, in other words, there's supposed to be a democratic process from the local level all the way up. So, the idea that that is being circumvented by corrupt criminals across the board in super red states, that's been one of my biggest learning curves, because I found it hard to believe until I saw the evidence and heard the stories directly from these people, but it is happening.
And
So
and you and
it
as
just
you
goes
and you and I have discussed, Jim, compounding the problem is conservative media doesn't like to get involved and expose it. And it's because a lot of conservative media is funded by big donors, just like the leftist media is. And they don't want to get involved as what they see as internal GOP squabbles. So there's like hardly anybody writing about this, only if you're digging deep like you are.
No.
And it's not
Yeah. And
and
yeah, or
you're
like
not
even Mike.
writing for some national newspaper. So I mean, you know what I mean? Trying to get the
No,
word out
no,
is
not at all. I mean, even Michael Watley, who was running for Senate, right? He was the replacement of another Rhino Rona McDaniel. You remember her? She was she was the chairman of the Republican National Committee, right? So Michael Watley took over with Laura Trump. And Michael Watley, while he was chairman, get this. I mean, talk about criminally violating all rules and laws to basically benefit yourself. While he was chairman, he announced that he was going to run for Tom Tillis's seat. Okay. He then funded his own campaign with Republican National Committee funds and from North Carolina GOP funds, which is illegal. Okay. He then got the Republican National Committee, the North Carolina GOP, and Trump to all endorse him. And he continued to use the RNC chairman's social media accounts to launch his campaign. Now, that goes beyond conflict of interest, but that is, in my opinion, emblematic of how corrupt and ridiculous the Republican Party has become, and he's an emblem of it. So we are trying our best to educate people on why Michael Watley is an evil human. He even took money from all sorts of corporate campaigns that are literally against veterans. They're for many of these nonprofits that are backed by Democrats. I mean, his funding is from essentially the deep state and the Democratic Party, and he's meant to be the former chairman of the RNC. So
well,
this
well,
stuff shocks me, Rachel, and there's nothing about it in the news. You're absolutely right. Nobody writes about it.
Well, I will just add to that. I know someone who is getting a poll run to show that Watley does not have the support in North Carolina. And Trump's going to see that poll. And so we've got people working on that race at all angles. And with that, we should wrap it up. But I really want to have you back again, Jem, because I want to hear other things that you have learned about the Rhino Removal Project since you've been working and investigating this. And thank you so much for appearing on my show today.
My pleasure, Rachel. You're one of my favorite people on the planet. I love everything about what you do, and the world needs more people like you. And I am
Vice
honored to have been on your show.
versa. Thank you so much, Jem.